Hey there, welcome back to our channel. When Jesus spoke those words in the wilderness, he was not rejecting physical bread. He was revealing the greatest secret of human existence, that there is an invisible substance that sustains you beyond anything material. This is not philosophy. This is the operating principle of the universe itself. Most people live their entire lives believing that survival depends solely on external things, money, food, relationships, and health insurance. They work themselves into exhaustion trying to secure these things, never realizing they are living from the wrong source entirely. Joel Goldsmith discovered that when you truly understand this principle, everything changes. Your relationship with lack transforms. Your anxiety about tomorrow dissolves. You begin operating from a dimension where supply is already present, waiting only for your recognition of it. This is not about denying the need for physical bread. It is about discovering the source from which all bread comes in, learning to live, consciously connected to that infinite supply that never runs dry. A word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not a religious concept. It is a living spiritual substance. It is the energy, the intelligence, the creative power that formed galaxies and beats your heart without your conscious effort. This is what truly sustains you. Right now, as you listen to these words, your body is performing 10,000 functions without your control. Your cells are regenerating. Your blood is circulating. Your immune system is protecting you. What power is doing this? Not bread, not your effort, something invisible and infinite. When Jesus said, "Man shall not live by bread alone," he was pointing to this invisible dimension of being. He was teaching that conscious contact with this spiritual substance is more essential than any physical food. Without it, you live in constant fear and limitation. Joel Goldsmith spent decades helping people make this connection practical. Not mystical theory, but actual daily experience of living from this invisible source. And when people truly grasped it, their lives transformed in ways that seemed miraculous but were simply natural law in operation. Here is what happens when this understanding awakens in you. First, the grip of fear around money and supply begins to loosen. Not because you suddenly have more in the bank, but because you realize you have been drawing from a limited well when an infinite ocean was always available. Second, you stop the exhausting effort of trying to manipulate circumstances and people to give you what you need. You recognize that your good does not come from them. It comes through them, yes, but from an invisible source that is inexhaustible and already complete within you. Third, your prayers change completely. You stop begging God for things as if the universe were withholding from you. You begin resting in the awareness that the Word of God, the spiritual substance, your only work is to be consciously receptive to it. Joel Goldsmith called this living by grace instead of by law. By law means you get only what you earn, what you deserve, what circumstances permit. By grace means infinite good flows to you because that is the nature of God expressing as your very life. The practical application begins with a simple recognition each morning. Before you think about your problems, before you calculate what you need, you pause. You acknowledge silently, "I do not live by bread alone. I live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. This invisible substance is my true supply." Throughout your day, when when money or health or relationships arise, you return to this awareness. You do not deny the human need. You simply refuse to believe that the physical realm is your only source. You open yourself to the invisible dimension. Joel taught that this is not auto-suggestion or positive thinking. This is spiritual recognition. You are not trying to create supply. You are acknowledging the supply that already exists in consciousness in the invisible realm and allowing it to take tangible form in your experience. Within weeks of this, in practice, most people notice subtle shifts. Unexpected help arrives, solutions appear, resources flow from directions they never anticipated. Not because they manipulated anything, but because they aligned with the true source of all good. Let me tell you about Margaret, a widow who came to Joel Goldsmith's classes in financial desperation. Her husband had left debts. Her pension was minimal. She calculated her money would last exactly 4 months. Then she heard these words, "Man shall not live by bread alone." At first she thought it was cruel spiritual bypassing. She had real bills, real hunger, real panic. But something in Joel's teaching reached deeper than her fear. He was not telling her to ignore her needs. He was showing her a source of supply she had never considered. Margaret began a practice each morning. Before looking at her bank account, before opening bills, she would sit quietly and recognize that there is an invisible supply flowing to me right now. The Word of God, the spiritual substance, is my true source. I do not know how it will appear, but I trust it is already present. For 3 weeks, nothing visible changed. Her bank account continued its predictable decline, but something in her consciousness was shifting. The panic was lifting. She felt strangely provided for, even when the numbers said otherwise. She was learning to live in a different dimension. In the 4th week, Margaret received a call from an attorney. A distant relative she barely knew had left her a modest inheritance. Not millions, but enough to clear the debts and provide breathing room. She wept, not just from relief, but from the realization that supply had been there all along in the invisible. But the greater miracle came in the following months. Margaret's consciousness had changed. She no longer lived in constant anxiety about money. She had tasted living from the invisible source, and that knowing could not be taken from her. New opportunities appeared. Her skills were suddenly in demand. Joel Goldsmith would say this is not luck or coincidence. This is spiritual law in operation. When you cease living solely from the visible, limited material sense of supply and open to the infinite invisible source, that substance finds ways to appear in your experience that the human mind could never orchestrate. Margaret's testimony is one of thousands. People with incurable diagnoses who discovered healing. Business owners facing bankruptcy who found invisible doors opening. Parents with rebellious children who watched relationships transform when they stopped trying to fix everything humanly and rested in spiritual supply. Here is what Joel discovered that most spiritual teachers miss. It is not enough to affirm abundance or visualize prosperity. Those techniques still operate from the belief that you must create or attract something absent. The real secret is recognizing what already is. The word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not something you get tomorrow if you are good enough. It is the present continuous outpouring of divine substance right now in this moment. Infinite intelligence is flowing. Infinite love is expressed. Infinite supply is present in consciousness. Your work is not to make this happen. Your work is to stop blocking it with fear, doubt, and the belief that only the material world is real. When you live consciously aware that you are sustained by invisible substance, that awareness itself opens the channel for it to manifest tangibly. This is why Jesus could say to his disciples, "Consider the lies. Consider the birds. They do not labor anxiously, yet they are provided for, not because they are special, but because they live naturally, connected to the invisible source that sustains all life without effort or worry." Joel Goldsmith taught that the greatest freedom comes when you realize you are not a person trying to reach God. You are the very life of God expressing as an individual being. The Word of God is not distant. It is your true consciousness. The invisible supply is not somewhere else. It is the fabric of your being. When this realization becomes a living experience, not just intellectual concept, you discover what Jesus meant. You do not live by bread alone because bread is an effect, not a cause. The cause is spiritual substance, and you are immersed in it every moment like a fish in the ocean. Start today with this simple practice each morning before the world rushes in with its demands and fears. Sit quietly and recognize, I am sustained by the Word of God. Invisible substance is my true supply. I rest in this knowing, and I watch how it manifests in my day. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your own invisible supply like this video, to help others find freedom from material limitation, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith is wisdom that transforms consciousness, and comments that insight shifted your perspective on living by the Word of God. Beyond the morning recognition, Joel taught specific practices to maintain conscious contact with the invisible supply throughout your day. The first is what he called listening prayer. This is not talking to God, listing your needs, or asking for things. It is becoming silent and receptive to the word that is already speaking. Find moments in your day, even 60 seconds, to stop all mental activity. Do not try to think spiritual thoughts or visualize outcomes. Simply become still and inwardly receptive, as if you are listening for something just beyond the range of your ordinary hearing. In that silence, you are not waiting for voices or visions. You are opening your consciousness to the flow of spiritual substance that is always present, but usually drowned out by mental noise, fear, and planning. This is the practice that allows the Word of God to register in your awareness. Joel discovered that people who practice this listening silence consistently began experiencing what he called God's government of their affairs. Right action occurred without their manipulation. Supply appeared without their anxious effort. Harmony established itself in relationships without their control. The second practice Joel emphasized is releasing the world's hold on your consciousness. This does not mean withdrawing from life or responsibilities. It means ceasing to believe that people, circumstances, or material conditions have ultimate power over your well-being. When someone upsets you, you typically react as if they have the power to disturb your peace. When money is tight, you react as if circumstances have the power to limit your good. When illness appears, you react as if the body has the power to determine your wholeness. This is living by bread alone, by the material sense of things. Instead, Joel taught to pause in those moments and remember, this person is not my source. This circumstance is not my source. This condition is not my source. My source is the infinite invisible, the Word of God, the spiritual substance that nothing in the material world can touch or diminish. This is not a denial of what appears. It is a refusal to give it ultimate authority. You deal with the situation practically. Yes, but you do not lose your rootedness in the invisible supply that is independent of all external conditions. This is spiritual maturity. The third practice is what Joel called the withholding nothing principle. Most people live in a consciousness of holding back, protecting, conserving. They withhold love until others prove worthy. They withhold generosity until they feel financially secure. They withhold forgiveness until justice is served. But living by the Word of God means recognizing that supply is infinite and constantly flowing. When you withhold, you dam up the flow in your own consciousness. When you release and give freely, you keep the channel open for more to flow through you. This is not reckless or foolish giving. It is conscious awareness that you cannot deplete an infinite substance. When you give love, you do not have less love. When you share wisdom, you do not have less wisdom. When you contribute financially from a consciousness of infinite supply, you are not diminished but enriched. Joel watched people transform their financial situations not by hoarding and controlling, but by giving freely while resting in the awareness of invisible supply. The flow that moves through an open channel is far greater than what a fearful person can accumulate and protect. These three practices work together to shift your entire operating system. Morning recognition of invisible supply throughout the day, listening to silence to maintain contact, releasing material senses authority over your consciousness, and giving freely from awareness of infinite substance. Joel Goldsmith did not teach this as a theory to be believed. He taught it as an experience to be lived. Every day, multiple times daily, you return to the awareness that you do not live by bread alone. You live by spiritual substance that is infinite, present, and already complete. What happens over time is remarkable. The anxiety that once drove you begins to fade. The manipulation and control you thought necessary become obviously exhausting and unnecessary. A quiet confidence establishes itself, not based on visible security, but on inner knowing of invisible supply. People around you will notice the change before you articulate what is happening. They will sense a peace in you that is not dependent on circumstances being perfect. They will see provision flowing to you in ways they cannot explain. You become living proof that Jesus spoke literal truth, not metaphor. But let me be honest about the challenges you will face in living this way. The first and most persistent is what Joel called the drag of the world thought. Every day you are bombarded with messages that only the material is real, that you must fight and struggle for every crumb. The news tells you the economy is collapsing. Medical authorities tell you your condition is incurable. Financial experts tell you there is not enough. Family members tell you that you are being irresponsible if you are not worried. This collective consciousness of limitation is a powerful hypnotic force. Joel taught that you must be vigilant, not through gritted teeth determination, but through gentle, persistent return to truth. Each time fear arises, each time you feel the pull of material sense, you pause. You do not fight the fear. You simply remember, I do not live by bread alone. My life is sustained by invisible substance. This is daily work, sometimes moment-by-moment work. You will have days when the invisible seems very invisible indeed, when only the problems appear real. Joel experienced this too. The practice is not about perfect consciousness. It is about persistent return to truth. Whenever you notice you have drifted into material sense. The second major challenge is what appears to be a time lag between your inner work and visible results. You begin the practice of recognizing invisible supply. Days pass, the bank account does not magically refill. The illness does not instantly dissolve. The relationship does not immediately heal. During this time, doubt whispers loudly. Maybe this is just spiritual fantasy. Maybe I am fooling myself while my real problems remain unsolved. Maybe I should abandon this and go back to trying to fix everything humanly. This is where people give up. Right before the breakthrough, Joel explained that consciousness must be established before condition changes. You cannot maintain awareness of infinite supply for 5 minutes and expect decades of lack consciousness to instantly reverse. The inner transformation precedes the outer, sometimes by weeks or months. The key is persistence without anxious watching for results. You practice recognition of invisible supply because it is true, not because you are trying to manipulate outcomes. You release attachment to how and when it will manifest. You simply remain faithful to the inner knowing, trusting the outer will align in its perfect timing. The third challenge is the temptation to mix consciousness. You practice invisible supply awareness in the morning, then spend the rest of the day operating entirely from material sense, strategizing, worrying, calculating lack. This split consciousness produces weak, inconsistent results. Joel was clear. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot hold awareness of infinite spiritual substance while simultaneously believing that only human effort and material resources will save you. One consciousness must become dominant, and it becomes dominant through repeated choice and practice. This does not mean you stop taking practical action. You go to work, you pay bills, you see doctors, you make plans. But you do these things from an inner foundation of knowing that the real source of your good is invisible and infinite, and these outer actions are simply the channels through which flows. The transformation happens when your primary trust shifts from the visible to the invisible, when your deepest confidence is no longer in your bank balance, but in the Word of God that sustains you. When you know yourself as a spiritual being, not a material body desperately trying to survive. Here is what Joel discovered helps most during challenging times. Keep a spiritual journal where you record every evidence of invisible supply manifesting. The unexpected check, the timely phone call, the intuition that saved you from disaster, the harmony that appeared without your manipulation. When doubt attacks and problems seem overwhelming, read your journal. Remind yourself of the consistent pattern of invisible good becoming visible in your experience. This strengthens faith, not faith in your own powers, but faith in the reality of spiritual substance as your true source. Also, find a spiritual community. Even one person who understands living by the Word of God can be invaluable. Joel's students formed circles where they supported each other in maintaining consciousness of invisible supply when material appearances screamed lack and limitation. Finally, remember that challenges are not evidence that the principle is not working. They are opportunities to prove their reality under pressure. Each time you choose to rest in invisible supply despite frightening appearances, you deepen your realization and make the next challenge easier. To meet from consciousness rather than fear. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart and you are ready to live beyond material limitation. Like to support this transformative content? Subscribe for advanced spiritual practices from Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, and comment on which obstacle you are most ready to transform through invisible supply consciousness. Now let us explore the advanced integration of this principle into daily life. Joel taught that eventually, living by the Word of God becomes so natural that you no longer think about it consciously. It becomes your default operating system, like breathing. At this stage, you are already resting in awareness of the invisible supply without needing to remind yourself. Throughout your day when challenges arise, you instinctively turn within to that source rather than panicking outwardly. Your automatic response to any appearance of lack is remembering infinite substance. This does not happen overnight. For most people, it takes consistent practice over months or years. But Joel witnessed it in his own experience and in thousands of students. The consciousness, that which once required great effort and vigilance, eventually becomes effortless knowing. What changes at this advanced level is that life begins organizing itself around your consciousness. Opportunities that align with your highest good appear naturally. People who resonate with your awareness are drawn to you. Resources flow with remarkable timing and appropriateness. not through your manipulation, but through spiritual law in operation. Consider David, a business owner who practiced these principles for 3 years. At first, he struggled with the gap between inner work and outer results. His company was failing, debts mounting, bankruptcy looming, but he persisted in daily recognition of invisible supply, refusing to believe circumstances had final authority. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, his consciousness shifted. He stopped the anxious strategizing and controlling. He made decisions from inner peace rather than fear. He gave freely to employees even when logic said he could not afford it. He rested in the knowing that spiritual substance was his true source. The turning point came not with a dramatic rescue, but with a series of small alignments. A client who had disappeared suddenly returned. A competitor unexpectedly referred business. A solution to a technical problem appeared through an overheard conversation. Nothing miraculous, yet the cumulative effect was transformation. 3 years later, David's business was thriving, but more importantly, his consciousness was established in an invisible supply. He knew from lived experience that his security was not in the market conditions or business strategies. It was in the Word of God, the spiritual substance that had proven itself faithful through every challenge. At the advanced level, you also discover what Joel called imperiousness to world beliefs. The collective consciousness of lack, disease, conflict, and limitation no longer hypnotizes you. You can witness the world's chaos without being pulled into its fear. This is not cold detachment or spiritual superiority. It is simply knowing that you live from a source that is untouched by world conditions. When others panic over economic reports, you remain calm in an invisible supply. When illness sweeps through populations, you rest in spiritual wholeness. When conflict rages, you know peace that is not dependent on circumstances. This consciousness becomes a blessing to those around you. Without preaching or explaining, your peace is tangible. Your confidence in invisible good is contagious. People sense that you know something they are seeking, and they are drawn to learn what sustains you when everything around you is unstable. Joel called this becoming transparent for truth. You are no longer trying to demonstrate spiritual principles for personal gain. You have become so established in the reality of invisible supply that it flows through you to bless everyone you encounter, often without words or conscious intention. The ultimate integration is what Joel described as conscious union with the source. You no longer experience yourself as separate from the world of God. You realize that the invisible substance you have been recognizing is the very consciousness you are. You are not separate from your supply. You are the presence of infinite good individualized. This is the mystical awareness Jesus pointed to when he said, "The Father and I are one, not two with you here, trying to reach divine supply over there. One, the infinite expressing as you. The Word of God is your consciousness. The spiritual substance is your being." When this realization becomes a living experience, the concept of lack becomes impossible. How can infinite consciousness experience limitation? How can the Word of God made flesh be of good? You cannot, because there is only one life, one substance, one presence, and you are it manifest as individual expression. From this consciousness, life becomes an adventure in watching how infinite good expresses through your unique form. Supply is no longer something you try to achieve or maintain. It is the natural outflow of what you are. This is living by the Word of God in its fullest meaning. As we approach the culmination of this teaching, let me share what happens when this principle becomes your foundation. First, gratitude becomes your natural state. Not forced thankfulness for what you have, but spontaneous appreciation for the invisible substance that is constantly flowing. You wait, grateful not for things, but for the presence of infinite consciousness as your life. You move through your day grateful not for circumstances, but for the Word of God. That sustains you regardless of conditions. Even challenges become opportunities for gratitude because they deepen your reliance on the invisible supply. Second, you experience what Joel called the peace that passes understanding. This is not happiness dependent on everything going well. It is unshakable peace rooted in knowing that your life is sourced from the infinite and nothing in the finite world can ultimately harm what you truly are. Third, you become genuinely free. Free from the tyranny of circumstances. Free from the control of other people's opinions or actions. Free from the fear that has driven humanity for centuries. You are free because you know you do not live by bread alone, and no one can take the invisible supply from you. This freedom transforms every relationship in your life. You no longer need people to behave in certain ways to feel secure. You no longer manipulate or control because you are not depending on them for what only spiritual substance can provide. You can love freely because you are not extracting your supply from relationships. Your work transforms too. You no longer slave anxiously as if your job is your source. You work from fullness rather than lack, giving your best because it flows naturally from inner abundance, not because you are desperately trying to earn security through human effort. Even your body responds. When you cease living in stress and fear, believing you must single-handedly keep everything together, the body relaxes. Joel witnessed countless healings occurred when people finally released human struggle and rested in the invisible supply as their true sustainer. This is not about becoming passive or irresponsible. It is about discovering the right source of action. When you act from awareness of spiritual substance rather than material lack, your actions are more effective, more creative, more aligned with your highest good and the good of all. Joel Goldsmith's final wisdom on this principle is perhaps most important. He said that you cannot teach this to anyone. You can only live it, and your living it becomes an invitation for others to discover their own invisible supply. Your consciousness established in truth is your greatest gift to the world. Do not burden yourself with trying to convince others or prove spiritual principles. Simply live from the awareness that you do not live by bread alone. Let your peace, your provision, your freedom speak silently. When people are ready, they will ask what sustains you, and then you can share. Remember, too, that this is not a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly forever. It is a daily practice, moment-by-moment choice. Some days will feel easy with an invisible supply abundantly evident. Other days will test your resolve, and you will need to consciously return to the truth repeatedly. Be patient and compassionate with yourself in this journey. Joel himself faced challenges and doubts throughout his life. What made him a master was not perfect consciousness, but persistent faithfulness to truth. Each time he forgot, he remembered. Each time fear arose, he returned to the invisible supply. This faithfulness is what transforms consciousness. Now you know the secret Jesus revealed in the wilderness. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. This is not religious dogma. It is the fundamental principle of existence. You are sustained by invisible spiritual substance, and your recognition of this truth opens the channel for it to manifest in your experience. Begin today, each morning before the world crushes in. Recognize I do not live by bread alone. Invisible supply is my source. Throughout your day, return to this awareness whenever fear or lack appears. Practice listening to silence. Release material senses authority. Give freely from knowing of infinite substance. Be patient with the process. Consciousness shifts gradually, but each day of practice establishes you more firmly in truth. Watch for evidence of invisible supply manifesting. Record them. Let them strengthen your faith until faith becomes knowing, and knowing becomes your lived reality. You are not a material being trying to survive in a world of limitation. You are a spiritual consciousness individualized, sustained eternally by the Word of God. This is your true identity. This is your infinite supply. This is the freedom Jesus came to reveal. Live from this knowing and watch your entire world transform. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets and you are ready to live by the Word of God rather than bread alone, like this video to help others discover their invisible supply. Subscribe for more transformative teachings that change consciousness, and comment. I am sustained by an invisible supply to confirm your new foundation in truth. Thanks for watching.